Victoria Blackwood believed she was claiming my territory. What she actually did was construct $125,000 worth of complementary property enhancements. Everything began when Victoria arrived with her demolition team, gesturing toward the cedar boundary wall my late husband and I had constructed together. "Remove it entirely," she declared. "Shared beach access for all residents." However, this public route she was carving through my land led directly to her exclusive waterfront pavilion. The buzzing of power tools drowned out my objections as to decades of cherished moments turned to sawdust. The sharp scent of wood shavings mingled with equipment fumes. What truly sickened me was witnessing her destroy the final creation Michael and I had built as partners. What would you do if someone with fabricated authority demolished your most treasured memories for their personal gain? Share your location and tell me about the most shocking HOA disaster you've witnessed. Here's what Victoria didn't realize. I had worked for 3 decades as a land assessment specialist. The investigation I conducted that evening showed she was constructing her ideal walkway on the incorrect side of the boundary. Markers, she was about to present me with the most valuable gift any neighbor has ever provided. Subscribe for HOA Tales. It's featuring the most satisfying comeuppance in property history. Let me rewind and explain how this conflict originated. I'm Margaret Sullivan, 62-year-old retired land assessment expert living in the waterfront cottage my grandparents bequeathed me. After losing my husband Michael to a heart attack 4 years ago, this place became my sanctuary. Michael and I built that cedar wall during his final autumn. He was too frail for heavy construction, but insisted on supporting every plank while I secured them. "Something lasting," he murmured, tracing the wood grain. "So our love remains here always." Then Victoria Blackwood purchased the estate across the street. Imagine a 48-year-old corporate lawyer with calculating eyes and a smile that could freeze fire. Designer wardrobe, flawlessly styled hair, and the warmth of a parking meter. Her crystal mansion cost more than most families' life savings, but it had one critical weakness: no direct beach access. Meanwhile, my modest cottage sat directly on the shore with a private pier. Within 3 months of relocating, Victoria got herself appointed HOA chairwoman. Suddenly, we faced new regulations weekly. No recreational vehicles in driveways, no flower beds exceeding 24 inches, no seasonal displays after January 5th. She was transforming our peaceful community into suburban surveillance state. The aroma of her arrogance was stronger than her expensive cologne. Then arrived the notice that ignited everything. Ivory paper, official header dripping with false courtesy. Ms. Sullivan, your boundary wall violates updated height limitations. Reduced to 3 feet immediately, or face $750 weekly penalties. Non-negotiable. V. Blackwood, HOA chairwoman. I contacted her that afternoon. "Mrs. Blackwood, this wall has stood here 20 years, with complete HOA authorization." Her tone became syrupy sweet. "Previous rules are irrelevant, darling. We're modernizing. Grandfather provisions are obsolete." My pulse quickened. That's not how property regulations function. It's how my HOA functions. 45 days to comply, or we begin asset seizure. Have a wonderful day. She disconnected like she'd just ordered coffee. But here's where things became intriguing. The following morning, I was having tea on my porch when I spotted Victoria standing at her bedroom window, staring directly at my pier through binoculars. Not casual observation, full surveillance mode. When she noticed me watching her watch me, she quickly closed the curtains. It's when I understood this wasn't about wall height violations or community standards. This was about my waterfront access, and she coveted it. 3 days later, I returned from the farmer's market to find fluorescent paint marking my entire wall perimeter. Not just the wall. They'd marked my herb garden, my mailbox, even Michael's remembrance bench. The message attached to my door was concise. "Surveying for compliance adjustments. Construction begins Wednesday. Blackwood Development Services." I stood there holding that message, inhaling the diesel exhaust still lingering from their machinery, and something crystallized. Victoria wasn't merely some pushy HOA chairwoman. She was executing a scheme, and I was her target. She assumed she was dealing with a mourning widow who'd surrender without resistance. She had no clue she'd just challenged someone who'd spent 30 years ensuring people knew. precisely where their property boundaries were established. That evening, I retrieved my assessment equipment for the first time since retirement. If Victoria wanted to play property games, I was about to demonstrate what a professional looked like. The battle was officially declared. Wednesday morning struck like a hammer blow at 6:30 a.m. Diesel engines roared as Victoria directed her crew like a suburban dictator. "Demolish everything," she commanded.
Ow.
"Every plank must go." The acrid smell of chainsaw smoke mixed with sawdust made my tea taste bitter. But as I observed them working, my assessment mind noticed something crucial. This wasn't just destruction. They were constructing something massive. Professional brick walkway, decorative illumination, landscaping borders. This represented at least $95,000 worth of construction. "What precisely are you building?" I called from my porch. Victoria spun around with that venomous grin. "Public beach access, darling. Community property for everyone. Community property on my land." She waved an official portfolio. "Actually, this land was never truly yours. Adverse possession regulations. We've been utilizing this area for years." She was claiming legal ownership of my property through false adverse possession. But here's what made my blood freeze. Her walkway curved directly toward her mansion's rear entrance. This public access was her private highway to my waterfront. That night, I researched every document I possessed. By 4 a.m., I discovered something magnificent. The next morning, I was prepared with my counterattack. "Morning, Mrs. Blackwood. Impressive construction project." She appeared suspicious. "Thank you. I'm pleased you're accepting the community benefits." "Oh, I'm very interested. So interested that I documented every day I've used this exact area for the past 20 years. I held up a thick photo album. Gardening, wall maintenance, property inspections. Turns out, adverse possession cannot work when the owner actively uses their land. Her confident expression cracked. I also contacted the city planning department. It's a curious thing. No permits on file for this address. There must be. And here's the really interesting part. I filed a formal complaint about unauthorized construction. Inspector Williams arrives at 1 p.m. The mask dropped completely. "You interfering witch? Have a wonderful day, Mrs. Blackwood." 4 hours later, Inspector Williams examined the site with the enthusiasm of someone investigating insurance fraud. "Ma'am, where are your permits?" Victoria fumbled frantically. "They're being processed. Construction stops immediately. This is clearly private property with no construction authorization." He placed a bright orange stop work order on her equipment. "Everything off-site by 6 p.m. or face $750 daily fines." As Williams drove away, Victoria glared at me with pure hatred. "This war isn't finished." "No," I agreed, watching her crew pack up thousands of dollars in equipment, "but you just made a very expensive mistake." What she didn't know was that, while she'd been playing amateur lawyer with fake adverse possession claims, I'd been conducting real property research that would soon make this the costliest construction project in community history. Her little land grab was about to become my biggest windfall. You'd think a stop work order would humble most people. But Victoria Blackwood was a special breed of entitled that viewed setbacks as personal warfare requiring nuclear response. 3 days later, I found a certified letter attached to my door, like a legal ransom note. Emergency HOA meeting, mandatory attendance. 8 p.m. tonight, the agenda was simple. Motion to fine Margaret Sullivan $3,000 for obstruction of community projects. She was calling an emergency meeting to punish me for reporting her crimes. The audacity was breathtaking. That evening, I walked into the community center to find Victoria had stacked the deck. 9 residents total, 5 supporters clustered near the front. 3 neutrals in the middle, and me sitting alone like I was on trial. "We're here to address Ms. Sullivan's deliberate sabotage of our beach access project," Victoria announced with theatrical authority. Mrs. Henderson, our 84-year-old retired teacher, raised her hand. "Sabotage," she reported illegal construction. "That's called citizenship." Victoria's smile could freeze hell. Miss Sullivan cost our community thousands in delays. Her selfishness blocks progress for everyone. Progress? I stood slowly. "You mean stealing my property for your private walkway?" "It's community easement land," she snapped. then forced sweetness back into her voice. The HOA has every right to claim unused areas. It's time for my first surprise. I pulled out my phone and hit play. Actually, this land was never truly yours. Adverse possession regulations. We've been utilizing this area for years. Her own voice filled the room. Crystal clear, unmistakably damning. Illegal recording, she shrieked. California is a one-party consent state, I replied calmly. Perfectly legal to record my own conversations. The room went dead silent. Even her supporters looked uncomfortable, but Victoria wasn't finished. Regardless, Miss Sullivan's actions require consequences. I motioned for $3,000 in fines and foreclosure proceedings if unpaid within 45 days. Mrs. Henderson exploded. Foreclosure? Over reporting illegal construction? Have you lost your mind? I've consulted with my attorney. Victoria waved a legal document. Everything is legitimate. That's when I noticed the letterhead. Blackwood and Associates. She was her own lawyer. Mrs. Blackwood, you're providing legal counsel to the HOA while serving as its chairwoman, saving the community money with my expertise. That's called conflict of interest, grounds for removal and ethics violations. Her confidence cracked. Visibly, Roberto Martinez, our neighborhood electrician, cleared his throat. If she's been planning this for months, and she's chairwoman, and she's the lawyer who's been paying for all this legal advice she's giving herself? Brilliant question. I watched Victoria's brain scramble for an answer that wouldn't incriminate her. The HOA compensates for services rendered, she stammered. How much? Mrs. Henderson demanded. Attorney-client privilege, Victoria replied. Roberto laughed. Lady, you can't have privilege with yourself. That's like performing surgery on your own appendix. But here's where Victoria made her fatal mistake. Instead of retreating, she went nuclear. Fine, I've worked for free to help. This ungrateful community, Miss Sullivan's obstruction cost us $20,000 in delays. She pays, or we lien her property. I smiled and placed a folder on the table. Actually, let's talk about that $20,000. I requested our HOA financial records today. Public information available to any homeowner. Her face went ghost white. Interesting payments to Blackwood Development Services. But here's the really fascinating part. I opened the folder dramatically. According to state business records, Blackwood Development Services was incorporated for weeks after you became HOA chairwoman. You literally created a company to bill us. The room erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. But wait, it gets better. Your development company has been billing our HOA for consultation fees for 8 months before any construction even started. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You've been embezzling from the community while planning to steal my land. That's not just conflict of interest. That's fraud. The silence was deafening. Even her supporters were staring at her with disgust. Victoria Blackwood had just been exposed as a common criminal in front of the entire neighborhood. You could have heard a pin drop in that community center. Victoria sat frozen, probably calculating her felony count. But if you think getting caught embezzling would make her surrender, you don't know sociopaths like Victoria Blackwood. 4 days later, she went nuclear. Was watering Michael's herb garden when Roberto jogged over looking like he'd seen a ghost. Margaret, you need to see this. He handed me a flyer distributed to every house in the neighborhood. Concerned neighbors meeting, addressing the mental health crisis on Ocean View Drive. My blood turned to ice as I read, recent erratic behavior by Margaret Sullivan has raised serious safety concerns. Community intervention may be necessary to address grief-induced instability, endangering property values and neighborhood harmony. She was weaponizing my grief in writing, to everyone I knew. There's more, Roberto said grimly. She's telling people you've been drinking heavily, talking to yourself, screaming at imaginary intruders. Classic signs of psychological breakdown. Afternoon, Mrs. Henderson called in tears. Margaret, Adult Protective Services came asking about your welfare. I told them you're fine, but they said they'd received multiple concerned calls about your mental state. But Victoria's masterstroke came the next morning. I found a for sale sign planted in my yard without my permission. I called the number. Immediately. Coastal Realty, this is Jennifer. Why is there a sale sign in my yard without authorization? Miss Sullivan, your HOA chairwoman said You decided to sell due to personal circumstances. We understood it was urgent. Remove it immediately. I never authorized this. Within hours, 8 real estate vultures had called, offering 55% of market value for my distressed property. Word was spreading that I was desperate to sell. That evening, Victoria hosted her intervention meeting at her mansion. Roberto went as my spy and returned, shaking his head. She's diabolical. Margaret had tissues ready, spoke in worried tones about you struggling with Michael's loss. Made herself look like a saint trying to help a disturbed neighbor.
How many?
Bought it? Too many? She's convinced them the property dispute is you lashing out because you can't handle living in your shared memories. The psychological warfare was brilliant. She'd weaponized my love for Michael against me. But here's where Victoria made her fatal error. She assumed I was just a grieving widow with no resources. What she didn't know was that Michael had been a forensic accountant before his heart attack. Whitey taught me how to trace financial fraud. While Victoria was playing mind games, I'd been following the money trail she'd left behind. And what I'd discovered was about to destroy her completely. That night, I made 3 calls. Attorney James Park, private investigator Lisa Chang, and Channel 9's investigative reporter Sarah Kim, who specialized in suburban corruption. The next morning, I showed up at Victoria's door at 9 a.m. with a manila envelope and my biggest smile. Morning, Victoria. Thanks for your concern about my mental health. So touching. She opened cautiously, probably expecting another episode. I had my doctor write a fitness letter. Dr. Peterson says I'm sharp as a tack. He also mentioned that false APS reports constitute criminal harassment. Fascinating. I handed her the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly. And about that real estate fraud. My attorney found impersonating property owners quite illegal. But here's the really exciting news. Channel 9 wants to interview me about HOA corruption. The color drained from her face like water from a broken dam. They're particularly interested in HOA chairwomen who embezzle funds while calling their victims mentally unstable. The irony is just delicious. She tried to slam the door. The interview airs Monday. You might want to lawyer up. Have a wonderful day. As I walked away, I heard frantic phone calls starting behind her door. Victoria Blackwood was about to discover that declaring psychological warfare on a woman who'd learned financial forensics from the best was the biggest mistake of her entitled life. Game on. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Michael passed. I opened his home office door. For 4 years, I'd kept that room exactly as he'd left it. Forensic accounting textbooks lined the shelves. His computer hummed quietly in sleep mode. The faint scent of sandalwood aftershave still lingered where he'd spent countless hours catching financial criminals for the IRS. Okay, sweetheart, I whispered. Time to catch another one. I fired up his analysis software and started digging into Victoria's financial history. What I found in the first hour made my tea go cold. Blackwood Development. Services had been incorporated and dissolved 5 times in 8 years. Always the same pattern: move to upscale neighborhood, get elected HOA chairwoman, create community improvements that mysteriously benefited her property, then vanish when residents got suspicious. But here's where my assessment background paid off. I pulled the original 1985 survey maps. It's the ones I had personally helped create as a junior engineer 37 years ago. My hands started shaking as I compared them to current county records. Someone had digitally altered the property boundaries in the database. According to current records, my property ended 18 feet short of the beach. According to the original survey that I'd measured myself, my land extended to the high tide mark. I pulled up Google Earth's historical images dating back to 2003. There they were. The original stone property markers I'd personally installed, clearly visible in satellite photos. Exactly where the 1985 survey placed them. But the real eureka moment came when I cross-referenced tax records. For 37 years, the county had been assessing and taxing that 18-foot waterfront strip as my property. Every tax bill, every assessment, every legal description confirmed my ownership of the exact area where Victoria had built her walkway. The beautiful irony hit me like lightning. Victoria hadn't just trespassed on my property to build her shortcut. She'd spent $95,000 of her own money improving land that legally belonged to me while I'd been paying taxes on it for decades. Under California law, any improvements made to your property, even by someone who thinks they own it, become your property permanently. But the bombshell that made me burst out laughing in that quiet office was yet to come. I pulled Victoria's property deed and compared it to the tax assessor's maps. Her mansion, her beautiful crystal palace that she was so proud of, was built 25 feet closer to the road than the deed specified. Part of her house was on community land that she'd been claiming belonged to the HOAA woman who'd accused me of property violations, had built her own home partially on land she didn't own. I sat back in Michael's chair, feeling his presence like a warm embrace. He'd always said criminals defeat themselves. You just have to follow the evidence. Thanks, sweetheart, I whispered. You just helped me become the richest woman on Ocean View Drive. Tomorrow I'd file a quiet title action claiming my full property boundaries, but tonight I savored the delicious irony. Victoria Blackwood had spent 4 months and $95,000 building me the most spectacular waterfront improvement imaginable while simultaneously exposing her own illegal construction. The predator had just become the prey, and she was about to pay for every square foot. Armed with Michael's bombshell discoveries, I knew I had Victoria dead to rights. But 30 years of assessment work had taught me that evidence without proper presentation is worthless. Time to build an airtight case? My first call went to James Park, the property attorney who'd handled Michael's estate. James was a courtroom predator who'd never lost a boundary dispute. "Margaret, this is legal dynamite," he said after reviewing my evidence. "Quiet title action, criminal fraud, elder abuse. She's looking at federal charges, but we do this surgically. One mistake, and she lawyers up and disappears." Next, I called Lisa Chang, private investigator and former LAPD detective who specialized in suburban white-collar crime. "I know Victoria Blackwood," Lisa said grimly. "She's pulled this con in for other California cities. Infiltrate, embezzle, vanish. You caught her mid-scheme, which means she's desperate and dangerous." "How dangerous?" "Cornered fraudsters do crazy things. File false police reports, claim threats, sometimes even stage break-ins. Watch your back." The third call was to Sarah Kim at Channel 9 News, who'd built her career exposing municipal corruption. "If your evidence is solid, this could be the biggest HOA fraud in state history. But I need video proof, multiple witnesses, and preferably her caught on tape. Can you deliver? Give me 3 weeks." But my most important ally came from an unexpected source, and she was furious. Mrs. Henderson knocked on my door Friday evening, clutching a manila envelope with white-knuckled hands. "Margaret, that woman approached me with an offer to buy my house 25% below market. But she'd handle all the complicated paperwork for an old lady who doesn't understand modern real estate." The predatory pattern clicked. "What did you tell her?" "I'd think about it. But here's what really made my blood boil. She said property values were about to drop once certain undesirable elements were removed from the neighborhood. She was threatening the community while trying to buy properties cheap. Classic predatory real estate fraud, Mrs. Henderson would. You wear a recording device next time she calls." Her eyes gleamed with righteous fury. "Honey, I've been waiting 84 years for someone to underestimate me. Let's destroy this predator." Over the next week, our evidence mountain grew. Lisa traced $52,000 in fraudulent expenses. James confirmed my property included not just the walkway but Victoria's precious waterfront pavilion, Sarah discovered. She'd fled Nevada after similar schemes, but the smoking gun came when Mrs. Henderson's hidden recorder captured pure gold. "Listen, sweetie, this neighborhood's changing. Certain people are going to be removed and property values will tank. Offering you a chance to escape before things get ugly. Cash sale, no inspections, close in 3 weeks." Victoria was simultaneously threatening property values and offering fire sale prices. Textbook elder abuse. Monday afternoon, I called a war council in my kitchen. Smell of fresh coffee mixed with tension as James, Lisa, Sarah, Mrs. Henderson, Roberto, and 4 other neighbors gathered around evidence spread across my table like battle plans. Here's where we stand, I began. Victoria's embezzled $52,000, built $95,000 in improvements on my property, is running an elder abuse real estate scam. James's smile was sharp as a blade. Criminal fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, and racketeering. She's looking at federal prison. When do we strike? Lisa asked. I looked around at my neighbors who'd become my army, each with their own score. To settle with Victoria's tyranny. Thursday. Monthly HOA meeting. Full attendance, cameras rolling, legal papers ready to serve. What if she runs? Roberto asked. I smiled, remembering Michael's words about cornered criminals. She won't run. Sociopaths can't resist the spotlight. She'll show up to defend herself, and we'll be waiting. The trap was set. In 3 days, Victoria Blackwood would walk into her own destruction, and I'd have front row seats to watch justice. Served ice cold. You know what they say about cornered animals? They bite. Victoria Blackwood was about to prove that in the most vicious way imaginable. Tuesday morning, sirens woke me up. 2 police cruisers sat in my driveway, and Officer Chen was walking toward my door looking like he'd rather be anywhere. Else, Miss Sullivan, we received reports of threats against a neighbor. Mind if we come in? My stomach dropped. Mrs. Blackwood says you've been calling her at all hours, making threatening statements about revenge and making her pay. She's filing for a restraining order. Almost laughed at the audacity. Officer, I haven't called her once. My attorney specifically told me to avoid contact. She provided these. He handed me screenshots of text messages allegedly from my phone sent at 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. containing increasingly hostile language about property disputes. The messages were masterfully crafted. Exactly what an angry, grieving widow might send during sleepless nights, except I'd been asleep with my phone charging in the kitchen. Those are fake. I can prove my phone location with digital forensics. Chen looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, we take all threats seriously. Mrs. Blackwood seems genuinely frightened. Then came the Oscar-worthy performance. Victoria appeared at my gate with no makeup, disheveled hair, clutching tissues like a terrorized victim. Officer Chen, thank you for coming, she said in a trembling voice. I'm so scared. Ever since I had to report her violations, she's been unstable. She'd transformed from imperious HOA dictator to vulnerable victim in 12 hours. Pure theater, after. The police left. I called James immediately. They're spoofed messages. James, I believe you, but she's building a harassment case to discredit you before Thursday's meeting. She gets a restraining order. Anything you say becomes vindictive harassment. But Victoria's masterstroke was yet to come. That afternoon, Roberto came running over, face flushed with fury. Margaret, you need to see what's happening at the community center. We found Victoria holding an impromptu safety meeting in the parking lot, with 18 residents, mostly elderly women. I know you have questions about Thursday's meeting, she said in that sickeningly maternal voice. But I want you to know we've taken precautions. Miss Sullivan has been making threats, and we have police documentation of her deteriorating mental state. She was poisoning the jury pool, preparing them to dismiss anything I said as delusional rambling. Sometimes grief affects people dangerously, she continued. We can't let one person's breakdown endanger our community. What Victoria didn't realize was that Lisa Chang, my private investigator, was recording everything from across the street with a telephoto lens and directional microphone. It's professional surveillance equipment that would hold up in court. But the real bombshell came. An hour before the meeting, Miss Sullivan, Detective Morrison, County Fraud Division. We've received reports that you've been tampering with property records and filing false boundary claims. The timing was surgical precision, Detective. I haven't filed anything false. Ma'am, we need you to come in for questioning tonight. She was trying to get me arrested an hour before the meeting that would expose her crimes. Who filed this complaint? I can't reveal that, but they seemed very concerned about elderly residents being defrauded by fake property claims. Victoria had accused me of her own crimes? The irony was breathtaking. But here's where her desperation revealed a fatal flaw. I called James immediately. She's trying to have me arrested before tonight's meeting. Actually, this is perfect, James said. and I could hear him smiling. She just committed a felony, filing a false police report to interfere with legal proceedings. But more importantly, her complaint triggered an automatic investigation. How is that good? Because Detective Morrison will want to see all the evidence, including what we have on Victoria. She just opened a criminal investigation into herself. As I drove to the station with James, I realized Victoria's fatal mistake. In her desperation to destroy me, she'd handed law enforcement a complete roadmap to her own crimes. The hunter had just walked into her own trap. The county sheriff's station smelled like stale coffee and shattered lies. Detective Morrison was a steel-armed woman who looked like she ate white-collar criminals for breakfast. Miss Sullivan, someone claims you've been altering property records and defrauding elderly neighbors. That's serious felony territory. I placed my evidence folder on her desk. Detective, I think you'll find the real fraud considerably more entertaining. For the next hour, we laid out Victoria's criminal empire. Morrison's expression darkened. With each document, this Blackwood woman filed the complaint against you. It's the same woman who's embezzled $52,000 while calling me mentally unstable. Morrison's smile could cut glass. Miss Sullivan, Mrs. Blackwood, and I need to have a chat. Tonight. Meanwhile, Victoria was staging her masterpiece. The community center had been transformed into a kangaroo court with Victoria as supreme judge. Chairs arranged in a semicircle facing her table, complete with hired court reporter and 2 intimidating security guards flanking the entrance. The stench of her desperation overpowered her designer perfume. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, as residents filed in. Tonight, we address the harassment that has terrorized our community. Miss Sullivan's deteriorating. Mental state has forced protective measures. But Victoria's theatrical moment shattered when Detective Morrison walked in behind me, badge gleaming. Followed by Lisa Chang with surveillance equipment and Sarah Kim's Channel 9 crew, her face went whiter than fresh snow. Mrs. Blackwood, I need to discuss the complaint you filed this evening. Of course, Detective. As you can see, Miss Sullivan has brought quite an intimidating actually, ma'am. Your complaint triggered a fraud investigation into you. The room went silent. I'm sorry, what? Victoria's composure cracked like thin ice. Filing false reports is a felony. But your accusations led us to examine Ms. Sullivan's evidence about your embezzlement and property fraud. That's when Roberto Rodriguez stood up holding his phone. Detective, I've got something even better. I've been Victoria's construction foreman for 4 months. She had me build that walkway knowing it was on Margaret's property. Said we'd claim adverse possession later. I recorded everything. The betrayal hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her own hired muscle had been documenting her crimes. Roberto, you lying piece of man, please control yourself, Morrison warned. But Victoria went full meltdown mode. This is a conspiracy. They're all working together to frame me. Wheeled on the assembled residents with the fury of a cornered animal. Don't you see? Sullivan bribed them all. She's the real criminal here. Sarah Kim stepped forward with her microphone. Mrs. Blackwood, Channel 9 has confirmed similar schemes in Nevada, Oregon, and Arizona. Same pattern, same company names. Care to comment? Those were legitimate businesses? And the fake text messages sent from spoofed numbers to frame Ms. Sullivan? Her eyes went wide. She hadn't expected us to trace those. I don't know what you're talking about. We have digital. Forensics proving the messages originated from your IP address, along with the fake police report you filed tonight. Each revelation drove her deeper into panic. The professional con artist was becoming an amateur liar, but her final gambit was pure desperation. She turned to the elderly residents she'd been targeting. Mrs. Henderson, you know I've only tried to help. These people are framing me because I discovered their corruption. Mrs. Henderson's response was devastating. Honey, the only thing you discovered was how to steal houses from old ladies while calling it community service? The crowd erupted. In angry murmurs as residents realized the scope of her manipulation. Detective Morrison stepped forward. Mrs. Blackwood, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, filing false police reports, and elder abuse. As the handcuffs clicked, Victoria made one last desperate threat. This isn't over, Sullivan. I'll sue you for everything. I'll destroy, ma'am, Morrison said calmly. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." As they led the neighborhood's former dictator away in handcuffs, the community center buzzed with shocked relief and nervous laughter. Justice had arrived, wearing a badge and speaking in legalese. But tomorrow would bring the real payoff when I officially claimed ownership of $95,000 worth of improvements that Victoria had so thoughtfully built on my property. The next morning dawned like Judgment Day. I was enjoying coffee on my deck when James called with news that made me nearly spit out my drink. Victoria made bail and is calling an emergency meeting to expose the conspiracy against her. 1 p.m. today. She's still fighting after being arrested on live TV. Sociopaths never surrender. She thinks she can still con her way out of this. By 12:30, the community center looked like a federal crime scene. Channel 9's truck dominated the parking lot with Sarah Kim preparing for live broadcast. 3 additional news crews had arrived along with county officials, FBI agents in suits, and what appeared to be half of California. The air crackled with the electricity of impending justice. Inside, Victoria had somehow convinced the interim board to let her make one final statement. She sat regally at the head table in a crisp business suit, projecting wounded professionalism, while her eyes darted around like a cornered predator. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice steady but strained, "I stand before you as the victim of an elaborate conspiracy orchestrated by Ms. Sullivan and her accomplices." The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Facing federal charges, she was still playing offense. The so-called evidence has been fabricated using Ms. Sullivan's government connections. Last night's arrest resulted from perjured testimony and falsified documents designed to steal my property. Mrs. Henderson shot up like a rocket. "Victoria, we all heard the recordings where you confessed. Digital manipulation. They've created an elaborate frame job to destroy an innocent woman." That's when Detective Morrison entered with an FBI agent and a folder thick enough to stop bullets. "It's Mrs. Blackwood, perfect timing. You're addressing exactly the people who need to hear this." Victoria's confidence flickered. "Detective, I trust your investigation revealed the truth about this conspiracy." Morrison's smile was razor sharp. "Oh, we uncovered quite a bit of truth. Starting with your real identity." The room went cemetery quiet. "My real identity? What are you talking about?" "Victoria Blackwood doesn't exist. Your real name is Vanessa Marie Torres. You've been using forged documents for 8 years. The mic drop moment. Morrison opened her folder dramatically. "Wanted by the FBI in 9 states for serial HOA fraud totaling $3. 1 million. You're number 623 on the Bureau's white-collar crime most wanted list." The revelation detonated like a bomb. Gasps, shouts, and the sound of phones frantically recording filled the air. "That's impossible," Victoria shrieked. "I am Victoria Blackwood. We found your real driver's license in a bedroom safe along with $142,000 in cash, multiple fake IDs, and detailed surveillance photos of retirement communities in Texas and Florida. She was a professional predator who had been planning her next hunting grounds." Sarah Kim thrust her microphone forward. "Torres, any comment on your appearance on the FBI's most wanted list?" "I'm not. This is your all conspiring, but the courtroom theater wasn't finished. I stood up with my own bombshell. Since we're sharing revelations, I have one for the community." Approached the front with surveyor documents. "It's the $95,000 walkway that Vanessa built on my property.